Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today we are thinking about change fatigue. That is a thinker, and luckily I have Vijay here who's gonna help us think about this in a whole new way. So thank you so much, Vijay, for coming on to my show, sharing your time and your perspective with me. You can do anything right now, but right now you are with me, so I truly value this time together. So I have to ask you, when you hear those words, change fatigue, what does that make you think about?
Well, hearing the words change fatigue, Mitzi, makes me feel tired, as the term suggests. Um, but aside from that, it also makes me think about failure because we
Mm.
often associate the term change fatigue with failed reform or transformation initiatives. I work mostly with government and public services organisations, and when you're trying to reform or transform really complex government and public services, it's more or less generally always about the people. It's about the people who deliver those services, and it's about the people who are the beneficiaries of those services, citizens. And if you don't get the people bit right, then you are doomed to fail. But we
Mhm.
often end up in a position where we have change fatigue. In the UK, we talk about it across public services, but you very often hear about it talked about in the context of the National Health Service. A lot of the people who work in the NHS will say, "I feel change fatigued," and that's because successive waves of change have come, and they're feeling tired, exhausted. They just want it to stop.
Oh, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the way that you brought it to attention is very beautifully stated because people are exhausted. You know what I mean? People feel tired when they think of this change fatigue. And for the public service, especially I think COVID era, really made us realize like those people who were on demand or they were necessities, they really they took a toll on it because they realized like, wow, not only am I considered a necessity, but now I have to deal with all of the extra burden or load that comes with it. And I don't think people really talk about that. And especially in the health service industry, because I worked in the health service industry for 10 years and I know exactly how that change that pressure is put on them and the pressure of just performing and continuing and maintaining that performance level can be extremely exhausting. You know what I mean? It really takes a toll on your mind, on your body, your soul, even. You know what I mean? You can't even function sometimes, So it's like, how can people start taking their lives more seriously?
Well, in fact, I would advocate quite the opposite, actually, that we
Yeah.
shouldn't take things as seriously as we do. I mean, one of the things that SIBO, my company, advocates for is to bring play back into the workplace. So
Okay.
when we're working with teams on reform, transformation, change, we like to bring a lot of fun and humour into the process. Now, these are often very serious journeys that we're embarking on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every single minute needs to be
Yeah.
deeply, deeply serious and
Hmm.
deeply, deeply unfun. So,
Yeah.
we use things like artistry, rich picture drawing. We build with Lego.
I
We
love
take
that.
people out to cook together. So we we do some fun stuff, and we often find that that's a really good way of reinvigorating those processes of reform, transformation, and change. Um, but we also advocate for a human-centered perspective, and when you put people front and center of these, big, ambitious, visionary attempts to change complex systems, you generally tend to get better results, or at least that's in our experience is the case. One of the things we also advocate for is empathy,
Mm.
and that's on both sides. So
Yeah.
um, you often find there are unreasonable expectations on the part of leadership, and there are unreasonable expectations on the part of people who are not in leadership positions. Um, Leaders often perceive change fatigue as resistance for the sake of it. Well, it isn't that. It's often very much it's just about people are tired of being asked to adapt all the time. Um,
Yeah.
Being asked to constantly adapt it's obviously going to take a psychological and sometimes physical toll on people. But at the same time, the people in an organization who are not in leadership positions may equally have unreasonable expectations that things can stay the same. And
Yeah.
in the world that we exist in right now, we've entered what I call a fifth industrial revolution. Um, we're under more pressure than ever, wherever you are, to change. It's not just about the rise of AI, but we've got a pretty volatile geopolitical situation globally. There isn't really any country on earth that isn't being affected in some way by the geopolitical changes that we're seeing. We've also got the challenge of climate change, et cetera, et cetera. We've got all these big existential changes happening, so it isn't reasonable for people to expect that things, organizations cannot change to adapt to those challenges.
Oh
So
yeah.
that human-centered focus, having empathy for each other is critical.
Oh, I love that the way that you broke that down because I do think it's very real how we can't always be so serious, you know what I mean? And we have to be real, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's about just having fun, loosening it up and just letting go. And the fact that you talked about bringing that fun back to the environment, to the organization, I think it really holds value because it's kind of like you were talking about, it's universal, it's worldwide. It doesn't matter what country that you're in, you're dealing with some type of turmoil, some type of pull, some type of take, some like there's always something. So no matter what industry you work in, no matter what country you live in, no matter where your environment is, you are going to feel this change fatigue in one way or another. Even in your family dynamic, you can still feel it, you know what I mean? You don't even have to work for an organization. Just that change in your home environment can just cause an anxiety, you know what I mean? That pressure, that invisible pressure that we feel on our shoulders. And I think when we are coming back to that moment of play, like you were talking about, oh my goodness, I really do believe what you're saying. Like it brings us back to who we are as humans, you know what I mean? It reminds us that we are humans. And when we are just focusing on the moment for whatever it is, we are allowing ourselves to be free, to be creative and be imaginative. And I like the fact that you bring Legos, you bring cooking because that allows people to touch, you know what I mean, and to use all of our senses. And when we use all of our senses, it allows us to feel grounded, you know what I mean? It allows us to just be present and in the moment and be more mindful. And I think that's a lot of times that people lose is that being present because they're so pulled by what had just happened just a couple minutes ago or just yesterday or just a couple weeks or days or years or whatever it may be in the past, or they're getting pulled far in the future and they're never really being in the present, you know what I mean? And or if they're in the present, their mind is chaotic and they're in this maze of things that they still have to do for that day. And it's like we really do need to bring back that mindfulness of just being present. And I think that moment of play really does allow you to just forget about everything that's happening and allow you to just really just be present. And the fact that you talked about empathy, oh my goodness, I love it when people talk about empathy because it really brings that reminder that it brings us that compassion back, you know, and it brings that understanding back. It brings that relatableness that we're forgetting because everyone feels like, oh, I'm going through this alone. I'm dealing with this alone. Nobody else understands me. Nobody else knows what I'm going through. But in reality, yes, somebody out there knows. Somebody out there cares, and somebody out there wants to hear you. You know what I mean? And it's just that putting ourselves in that posture of knowing that somebody's out there understands, you know what I mean? And I think that's so valuable for everybody who's listening and anybody wherever you're listening across the world, is just like reminding yourself that it's okay to feel what you're feeling, but just try to look at it in a different way has so much value. So I think my question to you is when do you acknowledge where change is bad?
That's a really good question, Mitzi. I think we often don't. Now, I mean, the job we do is we're often stepping in to scenarios where leaders have admitted that things have gone wrong. That's often the most difficult thing to do is to admit things have gone
Mm-hmm.
wrong, because it may also mean admitting that you've made a mistake. Sometimes it might mean not admitting that you've made a
Yeah.
mistake. But I guess, honesty, candor, those are things that we agitate for anyway. But really, it's about being honest with yourself and being honest with others, and that's the point at which you can hopefully generate self-recognition that
Mm-hmm.
something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not easy for any of us to do that. We work with people who are in very senior leadership positions in public services, and there's a lot at stake for those people. So, in the US, a lot of to a greater degree than we have here in the UK, people are political appointees. So the stakes for those people are even higher. But here in the UK, for example, if you're a senior civil servant, or you're a chief executive of a local council, or an exec in the National Health Service, you could come under scrutiny in the press, and um, that could be the kind of thing that ends your career. So
Mm-hmm.
we recognise why it's difficult to make those recognitions, that those make that recognition that failure has taken place. Sometimes discretion is also a good thing. You can make an admission of failure without necessarily trumpeting it from the rooftops.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you've got to do it in a way that feels comfortable, and authentic to you. But really, the first step is to recognise that something has gone wrong, and the second is to be willing to ask for help.
Yes, be willing to ask for help. Oh my goodness. I think that's so honest because people need to realize like when you put yourself in that position of vulnerability, people take that and realize, let me see how I can help you. They go into that problem solver mindset, and then they really do try to help you in whatever the situation may be. And if they may not help you directly, they'll find that resource that'll be able to help you with that situation as well. And I think that is something that a lot of people need to own up to, is like, you may not know all the answers, you may not have all the problems on hand, you may not know what to even do, but when you open yourself up and be honest with that and ask for help, or just for guidance, for redirection, or whatever it may be, that discretion is
Yeah,
truly holds valuable, because it really puts you at a high esteem, knowing that if you may not know it, you'll figure it out one way or another. And I
exactly.
also want to touch back on what you were talking about it's hard to own up to those mistakes, you know what I mean, or knowing that it's bad and changes and things like that, because you're right, you could lose your job, you could get canceled, you can, you know what I mean, that downhill path can really get real steep real fast, depending on the circumstance or the situation in hand. So it's just like that accountability, it really needs to be in discretion, and really have that discernment to know when to actually be honest about the wrongs that you have, but just also have that self accountability and honorability too. You need to honor your mistakes sometimes, despite the fact that if it means losing your job, at least you'll have your dignity intact, and knowing that you're still a trustworthy individual to own up to the fact that, hey, I make mistakes, I'm human. And I think that's a lot of the times people forget, is that we're human. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Despite whatever labels people want to put on one another, we're human and we're bound to make mistakes, but it's also about learning from those mistakes that really make something impactful come out of the situation. So I
Yeah.
guess my next question is, how can we tell if somebody's developing this change fatigue? Like, what are the symptoms that people can look out for?
That's a really good question. I mean, a lot of it is behavioral. In the organisations that we work in, we see cynicism, a lot of disengagement. So for example, people may not turn up to meetings. They may no longer engage through forums that they may have previously engaged with. Also, people only working to the letter of the contract. I mean, most
Mm,
organizations in this day and age require their people to do a little bit more than what they're paid for. That's pretty much in any sector or any industry, right?
mm-hmm,
Whether it's 1% more or 50% more, most organizations are dependent on their workforces to do more than they're paid for. And often when we start to see people who are only working exactly to the letter of what their job is, that is generally a fairly good sign that those people have mentally checked out.
Mm.
Um, and then, other things you could look at data. So in organizations where there's a lot of change fatigue, you may find staff turnover is heavier than maybe compared to other similar organizations. You may find staff sickness is higher than in other comparable organizations. Those are all things that you can keep an eye out for. Some of them are objective, some of them are subjective, but there's a range of indicators there.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you really touch base on all of those good details, you know what I mean? Because when we notice those high turnovers, when we notice that minimum work environment, bare minimum activities, like okay, they'll greet the guests, but they won't actually go out their way and guide the guests to wherever destination that they're actually looking for. You know what I mean? Whatever. I mean, we could put it in so many different scenarios and depending on the job, but it's really it can happen in any type of environment, any type of work field. You could work for the government, you could work for the local supermarket, you can work for, you know what I mean, your own business. And sometimes you can even have that for even being a self-employed per individual or an independent contractor. They have, you know what I mean, you could still have that where that bare minimum activities is really making that like flat like that light bulb go off to realize like something is going on internally that I need to really sit down and have that moment of reflection. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that reflection to really determine what is really going on is necessary so that you can really get to the bottom of the situation. You know what I mean? Because people really need to have that moment
Yeah,
to just like reflect, just to really think about it. You know what I mean? Just think about it.
exactly.
And so I know time is catching up to us. So what can be some lasting words that you can leave us off with to truly keep on thinking?
Well, there's an art to aligning purpose, people, and pounds, as we say in the UK, purpose, people, and dollars in the US, or whatever your chosen currency is. Um, but I would say for leaders that there's a particular challenge in the world we find ourselves in now, which is to not be responsible or feel accountable for everything. You can no longer take that role as a leader. Instead, your role is to create the conditions for success. So that means you can't be across everything all of the time. And at the heart of that model is trust. You need to trust your teams, trust your people, trust other members of your leadership team. And that trust is what will be your biggest protection against change fatigue. Because if you trust people, you're then effectively going to have to share the right levels of information with them. You're going to have to articulate what's the direction of travel to those people, and those are all things which guard against change fatigue.
Oh, absolutely. I think that that ties everything that we were just saying all together is having that trust, relying on that empathy, you know what I mean, connecting with one another, having that play, you know what I mean, and just positioning yourself to true success is really admitting to what you really can and cannot do. You know what I mean? We can't just continue to overextend ourselves in manners that really don't serve us because we're only hindering ourselves in the long run, and not only for ourselves but it also ripples effects into our family lives, into our personal lives, into our social lives, into our friend lives, you know what I mean, our relationships with our children, our parents, are just our anyone, you know what I mean, really you could fill in the blank and add in whoever that you know is affected by your decisions and your lifestyle. So I
Very
think
true.
when we realize that our lives are more impactful than what we actually consider them, then we'll have that consideration, we'll take that discretion, we'll have that discernment so that we can make a more meaningful decisions and actually be more realistic with our time. You know what I mean? You can't really extend yourself like an octopus juggling all of these balls with all these eight hands. Like we don't have eight hands, you know what I mean? We only have two. So it's like some people only have one, you know, and some don't even have none. mind. So it's just like we really have to be considerate with ourselves and not just put that limitations, you know what I mean? Have that heart to heart conversation. So truly I do thank you for this opportunity. And ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, go check out Vijay. I have access to his website that has access to so much great information, so much great content, and so many ways for you to just continue on thinking. Because isn't that the point? Yes, it is. So, with that being said, bye.